Um, Welcome to the conversation where we take everyday issues pertaining to society and break them down for you to understand.
Feminism is the overarching ideology that emphasizes on the social, economic, and political equality of the sexes. Although this term has been misinterpreted and has been used for personal gain, the advent of social media has propelled several discourses, and through this podcast, we wish to engage in a fruitful conversation about the need for feminism, as well as deconstruct some of its misinforms, such as pseudo feminism and femitizing. The socio-political state of our own country, as well as others, is a testament to the need of the hour. And in this podcast, we also wish to shed light on some of the roadblocks that feminism currently faces.
To spearhead this conversation, we have Ms. Amrita Nair. She is a persuasive litigator with practice area expertise spanning extensive legal experience. Her passion lies in public law, criminal law, and human rights. As the founder of the Silent Sexism Project and the Intersectional Feminist magazine, she understands the insidious ways in which discrimination and denied access to resources affects communities across the fabric of society. She is particularly interested in the shared origins of sex and race caste systems, gender roles, and child abuse as roots of violence, nonviolent conflict resolution, the cultures of indigenous people, and organizing across boundaries for peace and justice. She currently lives and practices in Bombay. Welcome to the podcast.
So, you know how it is difficult to narrow feminism down to one singular definition. It is more of an overarching ideology that disperses into several smaller connotations and subgroups, some of which allude to Marxism, radical differences, and alliances with LGBTQIA plus community. If you were to help an individual navigate through the various interpretations and misinterpretations of this term, how would you do so?
First of all, thank you so much for such a gracious introduction, Nidhi. And when it comes down to your question, Jinal, I believe that the term has been misinterpreted for the mere reason that even the feminists aren't united when it comes to what is the definition of the term feminism. Though it started off as a movement for women empowerment to get them the suffrage rights or the voting rights, as we know, to participate in the most basic of democratic processes, that is like voting. So that is why we got the term feminism with the term fem in it. But to say that it is only about women empowerment is wrong. It is so much more than that. And we all know that it has been misinterpreted as um, you know women waging a war against men, women hating men, blaming them for everything that is but there is. But I feel like one common feature of every definition of feminism is the fight against patriarchy, which is the root cause of major discriminatory norms, rules, regulations that we see around us. What patriarchy essentially does is it puts you in like pigeonholed roles and says that these are the characteristics that you need to have if you're a woman, and these are the characteristics you need to have if you're a man. And in that process, what it is essentially doing is that it is causing a lot of harm, because anybody who doesn't fit those boxes is looked down upon, or sort of reprimanded for being a certain way. For example, a man showing his emotions is considered to be weak, or a sissy, if you put it that way. A woman who's outspoken is considered to be calculative, manipulative, whereas a man who's doing the exact same thing, to quote Taylor Swift, when a man is being calculative, he gets away with it. He's just going to get extra brownie points for whatever he does. But for me to do it as a woman, I need to probably change my gender and become a man to not face any backlash for anything that I do. Right? I don't have to be careful about these things. So that's just about how patriarchy harms. When it harms just everybody, not just women. But when we come down to the definition of feminism, like I said, there are multiple definitions. Started off as a women's movement. Today, it's much more than that, due to the three waves of feminism that we'll read. I think we will touch upon towards the latter half of the podcast. But yeah, so one thing, the misinterpretation is feminism is always, almost always, I wouldn't say always, but almost always confused with feminazism. That is one misinterpretation that we come across. But for me, if you personally ask me, there are certain common factors that you see in different definitions of feminism, which is equality of opportunity, freedom of choice, and the third being equality of sexes, and no discrimination against anybody on the basis of your sex, your gender, your sexuality. And we need to understand that we are united in this fight. Like, beat any woman, right? A lot of women are scared to have this label of feminist on them because of this very reason, because of the misconceptions that surround the term. It has become such a taboo word that people don't even say feminist anymore. They're like, oh, you're the F word. Oh, you know the F word. We use certain terms so often, but when it comes to a term that has so much meaning to it, which is part of like a historical revolution that needed to be brought for people like you and me to even come and get educated in colleges and live our lives on our own terms, that has become a taboo. So I feel it's time that people understood that feminism is not a bad thing. It is not necessarily women fighting against men or women becoming lesbians or women trying to be I mean witches and hunting anybody who tries to bring them down. It's just a movement where we are asking for equal rights, equal opportunity, and just basic human dignity and respect.
Adding on to what you said, right? This is I was having this conversation with a certain individual where we were just talking about feminism and women rights and stuff like that. And while I was trying to advocate for it, the other individual just goes like, "I don't really understand why Indian women advocate for feminism or like women rights when women in India did not have to really fight for voting rights post independence." And like I'm over there trying to convince them that that's really not the point, and it's not really about voting rights. It doesn't really stop over there. That's again the bare minimum, and the fact that we had gotten that is something I wouldn't say applaud worthy, but again, at that point of time, considering the fact that a lot of countries were fighting, a lot of the women's were fighting against that, and that we got it, was again amazing. But I don't think it stops over there. What do you think about people who try to, just digress the entire conversation with this one line?
Uh, so I believe, see, we need to understand that the suffragette movement started in the 1990, I mean, not 1990s, I'm 1919, somewhere around that time where women started organizing. I mean, if you look at the seminal work, feminist works, they existed much before that time. But when women actually realize that no, we cannot be treated as second class citizens, we are in equal capacity first class citizens of this country, and they need to give us with provide us with basic rights or confer upon us certain rights that other people enjoy. For example, a woman could not open a bank account without the permission of her husband. She could not do anything that she wanted without the permission of a male member in her family. A woman going to college was practically unheard of, you know. And so when you look at this, you need to realize one thing, that yes, the movement began somewhere in the 1920s, and by 1928 we had suffrage rights in the UK, right, where the suffragette movement actually began. But just and then we got independence obviously by 1947. You need to see how much time gap there is. But just by providing women the rights is not enough. We came from a society where females were not educated enough. They weren't aware of their own rights, to be very honest, at that point in time. So if you give somebody a right that they do not know what to do about or how to exercise it, it is not going to make any difference. And that's why we lack, even today, if you go to a lot of rural areas, you will realize that women still, though in theory, have the right to vote. Their right to vote is exercised by the male members of their family when they go for panchayat meetings. There is reservation for women in panchayats. But again, she is only the mouthpiece for the male members in that family or that village. She doesn't even attend the panchayat meeting. Someone from her family goes and, puts proxy for her. So if this is the case, are we really saying that women in our country are empowered? We hear about sexual violence against women on a regular basis. We learn about, I mean, recently the Aftab Poonawala case is quite a big, uh, you know, shocker to a lot of people. But if men were also educated enough, to how, if they were sensitized towards um, all these things, like they had just gender sensitization programs where they knew how to behave, I think the risk, though not completely eradicated or uprooted, would have gone significantly lower. Now, when it comes down to whether India is doing well in comparison to other countries, yes, of course. If you compare India to countries like Saudi Arabia, yes, we are doing better because women have the right to drive and all these things. But that does not mean that there is no higher level that we need to aspire towards. Right now, a very simple thing is that, imagine, okay, so this is what I believe personally. And somebody, when they told me about this, it was quite an eye opening thing for me. They said, why are you always comparing yourself to men? Why do you want to, be at par with men? What if, um, you know, I mean, they said that women, I believe, have are much superior to men, and in their roles as a mother and in endurance of pain and tolerance and things like that. Why do you want to be like men? And I was like, that's not the point. The point is that when you are being treated as a second class citizen in comparison to the opposite sex, you realize that you are not even being provided with the opportunities that the other sex has. You have the potential. What good am I? What good is my potential if I cannot exercise it or, do things that I want to do with that potential, right? And this is what another person said, and this is the eye opening thing, where she said that, we believe that men are here. Now, while men are here, women are here, right? We are trying to reach here. But what if there is a higher standard that we need to aspire towards? Because it's not just women, like I said, who are suffering. Men are also suffering. So we need to sort of push them ahead as well. We need to work. I mean, if you are a true feminist, you will fight for gender neutral laws. You will accept the fact that men can also be raped. They are not the sexually dominating ones or sexually aggressive ones, which is a more correct term. And women are not generally sexually submissive. And men can get raped by men as well. Though we have 377, how many people report such unnatural offenses? It's only because of the fear of being uh, made fun of, people not believing them. And it is so horrible that, if I may quote one of the examples that happened, we were at a office party and one of my colleagues was being harassed by a female. And when the men around him came, when he told them that I don't think I feel very comfortable when she comes and, spanks my butt. And they were like, no, you're a man. Come on, enjoy the attention. So, things like this, we need to understand that your level of tolerance, the things that you're okay with, your boundaries are going to be completely different from another person's. So we need to stop saying that, oh, be a man about it. And all these things matter. So we need to stop saying that just because we had suffrage rights, our work gets done. Women have rights on paper. But until and unless you don't implement them, there is no real progress that is going to take place. Right. And I mean, when we come down to again, it all boils down to the waves of feminism. Though we got through the first wave, there are so many things. We have to reach the fourth wave as well. So in India, currently, you'll see that different parts of the Indian continent, subcontinent, Indian subcontinent, you'll see different waves operating simultaneously. Because while some women are liberated, they have some other issues, while women who are not liberated are still stuck in the first wave of the feminism. So, there's a lot of work to be done. It's like saying that, oh, there's no scope for improvement. There's always a scope for improvement. Yeah.
Yeah, just to add on to the waves of feminism, our next question is about that. So, before diving into the modern day relevance of feminism as such, could you just give us a brief timeline of the wave of feminism and what the current societal scenario looks like for us, maybe the metropolitan citizens and the rural areas as well? Digital outburst and outpour has definitely provided a greater outlet to voice one's opinions, but has social media also played a hand in the confusion that this term invokes now?
Okay, so I'll answer the waves first and the timeline so that you understand what happened. So the first wave, it came in the late 19th century, if I'm not wrong. And it was definitely not the first appearance of feminist ideals, like I said. You had Mary Wollstonecraft, who I think in 1792 published her work called Vindication of Rights of Women. And there's a very important line that she said in that, you know, I'm forgetting it, but she says something along the lines that I don't want women to have power over men, but over themselves. And that's what feminism meant for her because she wanted women to have personal autonomy. Now, that was in 1792. Then in 1848, about 200 women met, in a church. They came to around 12 resolutions at that point in time, in which they were asking for specific rights that women required, such as the right to vote, which was the most significant one out of the rest. Reproductive rights also became an important issue for early feminists because there were so many illegal abortions taking place, so many women dying of, having to undergo unsafe abortion process. I'm so sorry, excuse me. So they also became a part of the issue, like the resolution that they were coming up with. Now, after years of feminist activism, the Congress finally passed the 19th Amendment in 1920 and gave women the right to vote, and this is in the US, right? And this was almost 30 years after New Zealand became the first country where women could vote. Okay, so there were still countries which were voting. So first wave feminism had a fairly simple goal. For them, it was just about the society having to recognize that women are humans. Like I said, we are first class citizens and we are not property, right? We were considered to belong to our fathers, our husbands, and later on to our sons once everyone else is dead. So we could never exercise personal autonomy or have the freedom that we have today. Now, while the leaders of the first wave feminism were abolitionists, if I talk about like they wanted to get rid of patriarchy, their focus was on white women's rights. If you look at the first wave feminism, right? This exclusion sort of did haunt feminism for a lot of years to come, and it still does to a large extent, which is why we see different kinds of feminism, right? Now we have Black feminism, we have Dalit feminism, especially in India. So where you see a lot of, you must have seen the term Suvarna, where we consider Suvarnas to be the upper caste females who are definitely compared to a lower caste female in a position of power and privilege, right? So obviously things like this did happen. Then came the second wave. Now, second wave feminism took place between 1960s to 70s, and it built on what the first wave feminism um, had started off with, and they challenged what women's role in the society should be, right? They weren't mere houseworkers, they weren't mere caregivers, and they wanted the society to look at women as so much more than just the primary caregiver or the provider for the husband's family, right? So they were inspired by the civil rights movement in the US and they protested against the Vietnam War. Activists focused on institutions that held women back. There are women who wanted to be a part of the army but weren't allowed to because they were women, right? And this meant, if you look at if you look at it very closely, this meant the oppression of women generally because you're curbing somebody from doing what they want to do. And it's not an illegal act. Like if I'm asking to exercise my right to profession, it's not something that is illegal. It's not affecting law and order, right? Now, traditional gender and family roles were questioned. So, see, the first one was the political right. So, this is how I like to categorize that. The first way feminism was more of a political right. The second wave feminism was to do with more of social, because you're looking at gender norms, you're looking at gender roles, and you're you know questioning these roles. And that was a time when you had a lot of victories post 1970, uh, like the Roe versus Wade, though it is overturned now, but at that point in time it was a victory for us. There was an Equal Pay Act of 1963 which came in. Now the reason I'm saying the focus is on all these things, because the feminist movement actually grew in the West more than it did in the South Asian region. So, like you rightly pointed out in the previous question, we were comparatively better off, but that doesn't mean that it stops there, right? So three main kinds of feminism evolved during the second wave feminism, which was, you had the mainstream or liberal feminism, you had the radical feminism, which we have Catherine McKinnon a part of, where they they were major. So radical ones, just to give an example, a radical feminist will never be okay with any sexual act, for the simple reason that they look at it as a power play or a power dynamic where the man has more power over the woman. So even sex work, according to a radical feminist, would be oppressive, because no woman willingly would get into the profession of sex work, according to radical feminists, right? Then you had the cultural feminists, obviously talking about how culture paves way for discrimination and stuff like that. Now, mainstream feminism, that's your liberal feminism, it focused on institutional reforms, okay, which meant reducing gender discrimination. It meant giving women access to male dominated spaces, opening up the public sphere for women. Um, and like I said, the basic focus was always promotion of equality. Radical feminism wanted to reshape the society entirely, right? What they wanted to do is, what they were saying is that the system was inherently patriarchal, right? When the system is inherently patriarchal, and only an overhaul of liberation will, I mean, not overhaul liberation, but overhaul would bring the liberation of women. Then you know how radical, how strong your opinions are. So that's why they call it radical, just to show how strong their opinions were, and how about they were more of a um, revolutionary front, rather than moderate people who were like, oh, let's do step by step, we'll go through like policy reforms and things like that. They were like, no, let's act. So in UK, if you hear about Emmeline Pankhurst and the suffragette movement, like in the suffragette movement, you had, during a derby, one of the females jumped right in front of a horse, so they were willing to give up their own lives. That's how revolutionary they were when it came down to it, right? And I'm sure you must have you watched Sherlock, either of you? So you've seen that in The Abominable Bride, she was willing to make her death count just for the movement. So that's how radical feminists were, right? Now it resisted the belief that men and women are basically the same, right? We weren't. Now, cultural feminism, if you look at it, that had a similar view to radical feminism, and it taught that there's a female essence that is distinguishable from like the male essence, and we should be proud about it. Okay, so all three of them aimed or focused on achieving equality through different ways and different understandings, right? Now you look at the third wave feminism. So we're done with social and political one. You had, thanks to the institutional victories of second wave feminism, you had women who started enjoying more rights and power going into the 1990s, right? They were able to think about other aspects of their identity, not just, being attached to a family. They had their own individuality, their originality being, and also the rebellion was there, of course. This was an era of reclaiming what they thought was their rightful place in the society, right? Which was obviously, which was in opposition or in contrast to what men thought was the rightful place of women in the society, right? So, a lot of important cultural touchstones were, they started coming into picture. Like, for example, the vagina monologues was one of the most famous book. I think even today people read all these. There was Guerrilla Girls and punk rock riot girls. You must have seen that phase where a lot of women would just dress up in a very punk way and they'll be like, oh, we are punk rock activists. We love punk rock and stuff like that. So this was the phase when women were reclaiming whatever they thought was rightly theirs. Many women more freely express their sexuality in this era because till now it was more about man and woman, right? Nobody actually ventured into the idea of sexuality, so they started exploring. This was also the era where women who were feminists started getting tagged as lesbians because of a lot of women exploring their sexuality, um, in how they spoke, in how they dressed, and how they acted, right? Now, this sometimes obviously bewildered the second wave feminists like Betty Friedan. If you read, so Betty Friedan has written the book The Feminist Mystique. So though she was a feminist, she always felt like the lesbians' uh, agenda, like the group of the lesbians that she had working with her, that agenda should take a back seat. Sexuality should take a back seat because, first of all, it's more important for them to achieve equality, right? Now, while many ideas and many movements were seen across the globe, the one rule was that there weren't any rules for women in the third wave feminism, right? A woman should choose how she lived her life. So third wave feminism also, so that's why. So third wave feminism is very, very important because it went beyond what we understood of feminism at its core. And it started including a lot of intersectional aspects also, like race, okay, your caste. All of these things became like very, very important. And this was the time when Kimberly Crenshaw came up with the concept or coined the phrase intersectionality, saying that, okay, you cannot just have gender, race, sex define people. It is an interplay of all these things. If you're a woman, if you look at a white woman and a black woman, obviously a white woman is on a much better off position as compared to a black woman. A black woman is more suppressed because in a society, in a white society, a white man has supremacy, then comes a white woman, then the black man, and at the lowest rung of it is the black woman, right? So these are the waves of feminism. And obviously fourth wave, like a lot of people think that it is not, but fourth wave feminism came during the time when there was a Me Too movement. Like that's a part of it, right? So the fourth wave is just the growth of the movement beyond these concepts to cover a lot of um, other aspects like sexual harassment, sexual abuse, mental health, and other things. And that is where your social media becomes absolutely important, right? Because here women were taking reins of their social media accounts to call out any event, not events, like any instances of sexism or sexual violence or harassment that they've come across. Now, while social media can be seen as a tool, it has also led to people misunderstanding what feminism is because of what certain pseudo feminists are calling feminism, according to their own, right? And there was obviously the episode with Divyangna Trivedi speaking about what feminism is to her and her entire concept of, oh, we should probably call it humanism. But you need to understand that the word feminism came from a time where they were fighting for equal rights and they wanted to ensure that there was no hierarchical structure in the society when it came to the genders. And at that point in time, we did not have any understanding of the various genders on the spectrum or the sexuality on the spectrum at that point in time. We just knew that there are men and there are women. These are their characteristics. These are the rights conferred upon men, and these are the rights conferred upon women. And this is how we need to question them. So that's why the movement itself is called feminism, because at that point in time, women were the oppressed section of the society, right? That time we did not have other aspects. So that is why you need to understand when people say, oh, humanism, it is not easy to just change a term because it has history, and changing the term to humanism would just be like forgetting the entire fight for justice and equal rights and everything that has been ongoing for centuries now, and disregarding their contribution to it. So that is why I'm saying that the social media plays a very important role, because as a society we have come to a level where we consume anything and everything that's there on social media without thinking twice about it, and we just need to be convincing enough as we speak to capture the interest of the audience. So that's all that it takes, and few catchphrases here and there, right? um, so yes, we need to use the power of social media. It needs to be taken um, as a resource, not to smear or um, tarnish what the movement stood for, but to actually create awareness among the people. I think there's a major need for rebranding of what feminism stands for in today's world, and the only tool we can use for that is social media. I think people need to know the history, and we can do that through the use of social media, through reels, through Instagram, through educational videos. That is what needs to be done. So I think that's the role of social media for you and the waves of feminism.